Good evening. I'm Linda Miller, Chair of the Concord Planning Board. I'd like to welcome everyone here and on Zoom to the fourth in a series of conversations regarding Concord's response to the MBTA Multifamily Communities Housing Law. Tonight, we will review potential zoning scenarios. The Planning Board and Planning Division, supported by the Select Board and Town Manager, have over the past 3 to 4 months consulted with many groups and residents across Concord to create a draft zoning map and outline of zoning regulations for multifamily districts in Concord that could comply with the Mass General Law, Section 3A. Thank you and your neighbors for your input that launched this process. Turn up the sound? Okay, Matt, can we turn up the sound? Okay, thanks so much for letting me know. With the assistance of our GIS consultants, we will review the results from the online survey and 3 different scenarios that they have generated that test positive in the compliance model and reflect what was heard from the community. We will also be able to, on a real-time basis, adjust the model for variances and test for compliance. Feedback from tonight's session will result in a first draft that will be brought to the Planning Board at our September 26th meeting and be discussed by the board at each of our meetings between now and year's end. We will consider each proposed overlay district, zoning elements such as the dimensional requirements of density, setbacks, and height restrictions, and potential incentives to optimize open space and recreation, sustainability, economic vitality, transit use and walkability, as well as affordability options. Again, we are grateful for the interest, time, and energy that you have expended on this project to date. We welcome your comments as this process continues through the year. I will now introduce Jeff Davis from Horsley Witten to report on their results. Please hold your questions until the end of the presentation. Then we will take groups of questions from those here in person and then a similar number on Zoom. Hoping to get as many questions and answers as our time can allow, please limit your questions or comments to 2 minutes. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jeff.
Absolutely. So thank you all again for joining us today. I'm going to start by apologizing. This presentation is going to be dry. I'm going to try my best to make zoning interesting and engaging, but really, really do appreciate you being here this evening. Is the screen sharing properly? Is everything a go with the technology? That was shown. Okay. Thank you. Great. Wonderful. So for tonight, in terms of what you can expect, we're going to start with a brief refresher on the MBTA Communities Law. And so for those of you who have been following along from the get-go, this will be a bit repetitive. We'll try to get through that quickly, but for those who may not be as familiar, we thought that was important. We will, as was mentioned, give the results of the public survey that was wrapped up earlier this month. And then finally, the primary focus of the evening will be presenting to you 3 initial zoning scenarios. As Linda mentioned, they all meet the state's requirements. And so one of our goals tonight is to work with you all to find one of these or a modified version of one of these that makes the most sense in the context of Concord. And we'll spend the rest of the evening in group discussion. So again, briefly, I just want to remind everyone of the law that all MBTA communities must have at least one zoning district in which multifamily housing is allowed by right, which can include site plan review. This must be at a minimum density of 15 units per acre, and that can be the average across the entire district, so not everywhere within the district has to be 15, must be located not more, well, a certain percentage must be located not more than a half mile from a transit station as applicable. There can be no age restrictions, and they must be suitable for families with children. In other words, you can't put caps on the number of bedrooms or occupancy beyond what the building code requires. And finally, there must be parity with other uses. So in other words, multifamily housing cannot be required to meet higher standards than other permitted uses. And what are your requirements specifically for Concord? Every community is a little different. So for Concord, your deadline to adopt zoning that complies with the law is December 31st of next year, 2024. You have to have a minimum land area of at least 50 acres. You currently have a developable station area of 519 acres, so that's that half-mile radius around both of your train stations. So you're really only looking at 10% of the land area within those two half-mile radii. Your minimum multifamily unit capacity, which is in theory the number of units of multifamily housing that could be allowed by right in the underlying zoning, is 1,094, and this represents 15% of Concord's 2020 housing stock. And then finally, the percent of the district and unit capacity to be located within the station area, again, that half-mile radius, is 50%. So 50% has to be located within that basically 10-minute walk shed of the train stations, and 50% can happen elsewhere. Wanted to make a very brief reminder about affordable housing, that per the law, no more than 10% of units can be affordable, and these must be targeted to no less than 80% of the area median income. But there are ways to increase this. Up to 20% of the units can be affordable in conjunction with a 40R district, or by conducting an economic feasibility analysis. And the town has already committed to conducting one of those analyses in order to petition the state to allow greater than 10% affordable housing within its district. Also wanted to make a side note that we did look into the areas identified in Concord's housing production plan for the properties that were identified as being appropriate for affordable housing throughout the town. Of course, because of the restrictions on affordability within the MBTA communities district, these aren't all a perfect fit for MBTA communities. So you will see some of those are represented in the parcels that we analyzed, and some are not. Again, because of this mismatch between the goals of affordability and the goals of the MBTA communities districts. Brief reminder about our process, where we've been, and what I'm charged to do for you as your consultant under this grant. One is to determine the district boundaries, and that was a large part, of course, of the public survey, as well as determining the dimensional requirements. How tall should buildings be allowed to be in these districts? What should the setbacks be, and so forth. Making sure that whatever zoning policy you choose also complies with other aspects of the law. So housing affordability, the limits on, not having limits on family-sized units, and so forth. And then finally, taking all that information and testing different scenarios in the state's compliance model. And again, that's where we are today. We're going to look at several of those tests and see what the results were. So a little bit about the online survey that wrapped up on September 4th. That ran starting July 26th. We received 423 unique participants, and that was advertised widely throughout the community. And a big thank you to any of you who took that survey. We appreciate it. In terms of the results, they were pretty varied, but a slim majority of respondents were supportive of locating as much of the area as possible within those two half-mile radii around the station. A simple majority also agreed, or strongly agreed, to try to locate this district where multifamily housing exists today. Just under half agree, or strongly agree, that we should approximately evenly spread the district between West Concord and Concord Center. Just over half also were supportive of requiring incentives or allowing incentives to get things beyond what you would be requiring by right, allowing by right. Of those, 45% agreed to adding public green space or public realm improvements in exchange for a reduction in parking requirements. 37% supported adding mixed use or first floor commercial in exchange for a higher allowable height. And just over 40% of respondents believe that we should not be providing any kind of incentives to developers. In terms of building height, there was more consensus on this issue. 27% prefer to maintain the current building height, about the same amount, 30% to align with the height of adjacent structures. A good 25% supported a height of 3 stories, 16% more than 3 stories. And actually the lowest preference was for 1 story. And because all of your residential districts currently allow a maximum of 3 stories, the majority of respondents seem to be comfortable with 3 stories as that maximum building height. In terms of specific sites or parcels, we did ask people to either write and describe specific parcels that they thought might be appropriate for multifamily by right. We also had a mapping survey where people could go in and put a pin on particular parcels that they thought were appropriate. So of the respondents to the survey, 122 provided specific written suggestions for parcels, and we received over 6,700 pins dropped on the interactive map. And of course, people were allowed to post pins on multiple properties within the town. The most notable results of that effort was that there was high level of support for locations within that half-mile radius of both the transit station areas. The vast majority of pins were located in those 2 areas. But there was also some significant support for locations outside those radii, in particular some portions of Elm Street near the Route 2 Rotary and on Lowell Road leading into Concord Center. And you will see that on some of the upcoming maps. So, based on what we heard from the public, actually I had not updated this slide. The next slide you're going to see will be a map showing where all the pins were placed in the survey. So you can see the whole universe of where your neighbors said multifamily housing might be appropriate by right. The map after that is going to show our refinement and all the potential parcels that staff and the consultant team have been considering based on the feedback that we received from the public. And I should say that we expect some iteration of these parcels to be included, not all of them. So that first map you're going to see might look a little scary, but it's just the parcels we are considering. We don't expect that to be the actual district. And again, based on the feedback that we received, we really tried to focus on locations within a half-mile radius of the 2 stations. We did explore areas outside that radius where there was existing multifamily housing or parcels that were otherwise strongly identified in the survey. And we also are trying to consider areas where the town may want to provide incentives for ground floor commercial and mixed use. So this is the first map with all the different locations that were pinned in the survey. So anything that is yellow, highlighted in yellow, was pinned by someone. And all told, we had approximately, this represents about 2,224 acres where your neighbors thought things were appropriate. Of course, we had to whittle it down from here, and so we used some of the other responses from the survey to do so. So what you'll see here is a total of 65 parcels, approximately 300 acres in total. The yellow, again, represents potential locations. The green hash marks that you'll see are the areas that the state has decided are excluded from eligibility to be part of an MBTA communities district. And that is either because there are environmental concerns on those parcels, or they're publicly owned parcels that are unlikely to be ever used for housing The blue hash marks represent an active proposal for a multifamily housing development. There's a 40B proposal, which we wanted to note. And there are also some purple hashed lines where multifamily already exists today. And looking at this survey, probably the first thing you'll notice is the imbalance between West Concord and Concord Center. And so we wanted to address that up front. As you'll see from the two areas within those radii, a lot of the area around Concord Center are single-family homes, is the historic district, and a lot of open space as well. There just weren't as many parcels that met the standards that the people wanted to see as a result of the survey. So we also have an issue that anything that is not contiguous has to be at least 5 acres in size in order for the state to count it. And there were a number of parcels identified in Concord Center that were non-contiguous and less than 5 acres and were therefore not included. So just wanted to address that from the get-go. Also, as you'll note, there were people who went in the survey and put a pin in, I think, literally every parcel within the half-mile radius, right? And we know that not all of those are going to be appropriate, again, particularly among the single-family homes and some of the open space parcels that are really just not appropriate for multifamily. So these parcels represent areas with the most potential and that were identified by people in the survey. So wanting to dive right in, we have 3 scenarios to show you this evening. As I mentioned, all 3 of them we've calculated would meet the state's requirements and then some. I think they easily meet the state's requirements. So we can discuss today which of these make the most sense to you, how they could be further modified to, again, meet the town's goals while still complying with the state law. So for this first scenario, we focused on areas within the half-mile radius of the 2 MBTA stations. We also explored some opportunities for providing mixed-use incentive areas. And the mixed-use incentive areas are the areas you see marked in purple on this map. And I think it will probably be more useful for me to talk through my notes and leave the map up so that you all have a reference rather than a bunch of text. So one of the things that we have to do once we've identified a geographic area that we want to test is determine what the zoning assumptions are. So what the minimum lot area is, what the maximum lot coverage is, what your maximum building height is, and so forth. So we made several assumptions to put into the model. I'll just very briefly go over them. A maximum or minimum lot area, I think I'm going to keep.
No,
oh,
you're
good.
fine.
Okay. Minimum lot area of 20,000 square feet within the yellow areas, the yellow area in West Concord, rather. 40% maximum lot coverage. Again, that 3-story height maximum. We capped this one at 15 dwelling units per acre, which again is the minimum required by state law. Assumed a minimum open space of 20%. Minimum parking of 2 per dwelling unit. Front yard setback of 20 feet. Minimum side yard setback of 15 feet and a minimum rear yard of 20 feet. So again, that's all in you'll have copies of the slides. So I don't want to belabor that, but those are some of the inputs that we assume in the model. For the yellow area in Concord Center, we assume very similar assumptions, except we are assuming only 10 dwelling units per acre, since this is a smaller, tighter area. We're also assuming smaller setbacks for that reason, and no required open space minimum. For the 2 purple areas, and these are areas that are currently zoned your West Concord business and the Thoreau Depot districts. And you'll see these are just portions of those 2 zoning districts today. We try to follow the existing underlying zoning standards for those two zones. So there's no minimum lot area, there's no maximum lot coverage. Because these are being tested out as our mixed-use incentive areas, the assumption is that there's only one story of residential allowed by right, and that you might allow 3 stories in exchange for commercial on the ground floor. We're assuming 10 dwelling units per acre, no minimum open space, 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit, 0 to 10 feet of setback for the front yard, and 0 feet setback for the side and rear yard. And again, that is per your existing zoning. So with that, I am going to forward the slides, just go past these assumptions to the results. So we put this information into the compliance model, and I wanted to start by showing you what the results are for each of these areas individually, and then what they look like together. So for West Concord, the yellow parcels in West Concord, the district area was just over 130 acres, and the modeled unit capacity was about 1,800, just under 1,900 units. And again, our target is 1,094. The dwelling units per acre, 22.5. So again, well above that 15 average that's required. The West Concord mixed-use incentive district, which is, again, that purple area on the map that's currently your West Concord business district, was about 11 acres. You could get about 80 units, again, with that assumption of 1 story by right, and the dwelling units per acre just under 10. In Concord Center, when you look at the yellow parcels, that's again just under 10 acres, could produce potentially 94 units. Again, I shouldn't even use the word produce. The underlying zoning would allow 94 units. And dwelling units per acre at 11.5. And for the purple parcels, again, that portion of the Thoreau Depot district south of the railroad tracks, that's about 11 acres, could potentially support 91 units at 8.4 dwelling units per acre. And when you put all those 4 areas combined, you end up with 160 acres, modeled unit capacity of 2,148. The dwelling units per acre is 19.4. Again, hitting all of your targets very easily. And 91% approximately of the land is within that station area, the 50% radius. And the unit capacity is essentially 100%. About 99% of the capacity ends up being within that area. So some key takeaways for this first scenario. The parcels in West Concord alone more than meet the state requirements. The mixed-use incentive areas don't produce a whole lot of unit capacity for you. However, it's certainly something that you can continue to consider. And while it's highly unlikely that a developer would come in and say, sure, I'm going to take advantage of building 1-story residential by rights in these areas, it's possible. So you have to consider if that's an eventuality that you want. All right, moving on to scenario 2. So this scenario also primarily focuses on areas within the station radii, but we have eliminated the mixed-use incentive areas, and we've also eliminated the parcels in West Concord east of the Baker Avenue extension. Just acknowledging that, in the last scenario, the West Concord area was more than meeting the state requirement by itself. So what does this look like if we make that area a little smaller? And again, I'll leave the map up as I go over the assumptions. So we kept the same assumptions actually for both of these areas as we had in the first scenario. So all that remains exactly the same. And the results. So the reduced West Concord area is about 109 acres. Again, the unit capacity more than meets the state requirement, 1,593 units at a density of 25.2 dwelling units per acre. And the Concord Center area remains the same as you saw in the first scenario, just under 10 acres, 94 units, 11.5 dwelling units per acre. Taking them both combined, that's just under 120 acres, just under 1,700 units at 23.7 units per acre. And again, well over your 50% requirement. The vast majority of the land and the unit capacity is within the station area. So a lot of the same takeaways that even in this smaller land area, the West Concord portion more than meets the state's requirements by itself. But again, the Concord-centered parcels, even though they're not necessary to meet the state requirements, if you want to maintain some of the MBTA communities district within Concord Center, you can certainly do so. And lastly, we wanted to look at a scenario that went beyond those two areas, the transit station areas, and look at some other properties that got a lot of interest in the survey. And so as you can see in this map, that includes a portion of Elm Street, just north of the West Concord Center. It also includes a bit of property on Barrett's Mill Road, and then in the far southwest, you'll see there's property at 2229 Main Street, and I'm forgetting the name, Nathan Pratt, which have existing multifamily housing. The Nathan Pratt has existing multifamily housing. So we wanted to just see, what does this look like? What did these properties add? What did they give us? Are there ways that we can mix and match these properties to maybe offset making West Concord even smaller? And in terms of the West Concord land and the Concord Central land, the assumptions remain the same. In terms of the areas outside the radii, we basically used the same assumptions as we used for West Concord. So again, as a brief reminder, 20,000 square foot minimum lot area, which is just about a half acre, 40% maximum lot coverage, 3-story maximum height, 15 dwelling unit per acre, again, that minimum per state law, 20% minimum open space, 2 parking spaces per unit, 20-foot front yard setbacks, 15 side, 20 rear. And based on those assumptions, so again, this remains the same. This is the same area, same assumptions for West Concord and Concord Center. For the areas outside the radii, the Elm Street area was about 34 acres, could potentially produce 457 units at 30 units per acre. 2229 Main and Nathan Pratt, about 76 acres in size, 1,145 units at 17 units per acre. Again, if it weren't for this location being entirely outside of the station area, this would otherwise meet the state requirements. And then on Barrett's Mill Road, about 10 acres, 148 units, and easily hits the dwelling unit per acre target of 15.6. All combined, and this is definitely, like I said, a straw man. No one expects that this would actually be your district, but when you take all of these parcels together, it's about 240 acres, 3,400 units at 21 units per acre. You do dip below the 50% requirement for the land area and the unit capacity, but again, the expectation is that, you know, if you wanted to reduce West Concord in size and take 1 or 2 of these areas outside the station areas, that you would still be well above that 50% requirement. So how boring was that? Are you with me at all? All right, I have a few more slides to go over. I'm just gonna take a sip of water. So one thing that we wanted to go over that we mentioned briefly the last time we were all together in August, the state had just released new guidelines on mixed use. So when the guidelines were first released, communities could not require mixed use or ground floor commercial within their MBTA communities districts. And now that the guidelines have changed, that is still true. So we thought that might be adjusted, but what they have done instead is say, okay, you can have another district in your community that allows mixed use, and we can calculate what the unit capacity is for that district, and maybe we'll take up to 25% of that unit capacity and use it to offset what you're required to hit within your MBTA community's district. So just to briefly go over, if Concord wanted to go down that route, you could take West Concord Village, West Concord Business, or the Thoreau Business zoning districts and present them to the state as your mixed use districts. And in theory, this could reduce the number of units in your MBTA communities district from 1,094 to as little as 821. So that would be 25% off if the state granted you the full 25% reduction. However, if that were the course you wanted to take, any of the mixed use districts that you wanted to include would also have to be amended. So at a minimum, you would have to state that no minimum parking is required for any non-residential uses in those districts. And so if you're okay with that, that's great. If that's something that is not acceptable, then we probably don't want to go down that path. And then also, as you've seen in our past calculations, we have a lot of options for you that more than hit your minimum target. So you don't really get much benefit from using a mixed-use district to offset that because you're already there. You're already there very easily. So again, that said, it's still an option on the table, but in our analysis, it probably doesn't give Concord a whole lot. So the rest of this evening, we want to hear from you. What do you think about these scenarios? Do you have a general preference? What option do you think makes the most sense in the context of Concord? Obviously, there's a lot of ways that we can play with this. I have copies of the compliance models that we made for each of these scenarios here on the computer, and I'm happy to pull those up. And if you say, well, what happens if we reduce the parking requirement to 1 per unit? And we can see what that does. Yeah. I think that's it. Is there anything either of you would like to add before we open it up to Q&A?
No, thank you very much. It's certainly a lot to digest.
Yes.
But I know people in Concord are very quick. And so we're hoping that anyone who has a question, a comment, or a desire to manipulate a map will step up to the microphone and identify yourself. And I would ask that you limit your comments or questions to 2 minutes.
And I'll just say one quick thing before we start. We do have what we're referring to as exit surveys this evening. So we have hard copy surveys. They should also be up on the MBTA Communities page on the town's website. So, if you don't get a chance to talk to the microphone, but you want to make sure you write something down to share your thoughts with us, please make sure you don't leave tonight without filling out one of those exit surveys.
My name is Adam Crescenzi. I live at 100 Walden Street. Simple question. Do you have a chart that compares scenario 1, 2, and 3 testing models so I can look at the numbers across the 3 scenarios? It was hard to do it with the paper.
I'm so sorry. We're adjusting the computer and I missed your question.
The question, do you have a chart or can you answer the following? I'd like to compare scenario 3 testing model and scenario 2 testing model, scenario 1 testing model, and see what the numbers look like when I look at all 3 of them side by side.
I don't have it in, all the 3 spreadsheets are in separate Excel files now, but that's something we could put together.
So we can work with Jeff, have that put together in the next few days and post that to the MBTA Communities webpage.
Parashar Patel, 397 Sudbury Road. Thank you for the comment, because that was going to be one of my questions. Second question is, do we have a percentage of the units that would be eligible in each of the scenarios that are within the two radii versus those that are outside the radii for across all three scenarios? So in other words, of the minimum number of units we're supposed to have by state law, how many of them are inside the radii for all three scenarios, and how many of them are outside? I didn't see that either.
Yes, so that's that's on the slides, and so that's in your packets for the results for each model. It's the two last items. So in the first two
Okay,
scenarios, it's
yep.
over 90% for both, and again, for the third,
Okay,
it's
I
under the
missed
50%, but
Great, thank you.
yeah.
Hi, my name is Mary Hartman. I live at 16 Concord Green, Unit 6. I'm a member of the Select Board, and I'm speaking for myself. I've been a big supporter of our compliance with the MBTA Community Zoning Act because I realize that the Commonwealth has a problem with housing, the country has a problem with housing, and we're fortunate to have 2 train stations, and I thought we should do our part. But I have to be honest, I'm having trouble with these particular scenarios because of the imbalance between West Concord and Concord Center. If I understand it correctly, it's less than 10% will be enabled in Concord Center. And the reason I'm not happy with that is because I think Concord Center is ripe for development, and it's a perfect place for transit-centered housing. It's perfect. And I also know that in West Concord, there's already quite a few large, dense buildings that are in the pipeline now. And with these buildings, I know they're transit-centric, but they do come with cars and they do come with congestion. So we're putting a burden on West Concord. So I would really urge you to think about ways we can lessen the burden on West Concord and also possibly take advantage of the perfect place in Concord Center to build, I believe, community housing.
While you're there, can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Because that was one of the things we, as a team, very much struggled with. Well, where are those appropriate sites within Concord Center?
I don't know. I'm thinking Thoreau Street. Why not Thoreau Street from where, like, Dunkin' Donuts is down to the funeral home, or the other side? I mean,
So the big question there, and we can certainly include that area that we showed on the map in the first scenario, but the big question for the community, and it's entirely up to you all,
Right.
Are you comfortable with potentially having strictly residential buildings within those areas, or do you want to maintain that ground floor commercial, walkable village center character with residential above?
could I ask a follow-up question?
Of course.
To that? Great. Could we incentivize developers to put in something commercial on the first floor to keep the shops and then give an extra floor for residential? Is that an option?
Yes. So that was the point of the first scenario,
Okay.
where we basically said, all right, let's assume that there's one floor of commercial that's allowed by right, and if you did a special permit, you could go up to 3 stories if you provided that ground floor
Right.
commercial. So you can absolutely do that.
Right.
You just don't get a whole lot for it. So
But-
in terms of hitting your, so there are many
I guess every
goals here,
little
right?
bit helps as far as easing what we're asking West Concord to.
Sure. So if that's very important to you, then you can absolutely go with that option.
Okay, and then the other things outside of the half-mile radii, those areas out there might be another way to ease the burden on West Concord. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think I'd like to see more equity there, or more balance. Equity's not the right word. Balance. Okay,
Certainly.
great, thank you.
I'm going to take 2 more comments from the room and then go to Zoom.
Rich Feely, 347 Lexington Road. And this is sort of a follow-up, but a question I had to begin with. Your baseline, when you look at the Thoreau Depot, is that only 1 floor? I mean, if you look at the residential housing around it, it's 3 floors. So I would think you could get, if you had all housing, you got 3 floors. You ought to have 3 times as much as you've shown. Or even if you go to 2 with an incentive for 3, I'd like to see one that looks at 3 floors on that site and how many units that would get us, because I think that starts to get at the equity issue between West Concord and Concord Center as well. So am I right that the baseline, when you looked at Thoreau Depot, was only one floor?
Yes, and again, the thought being, if your preferred scenario for those areas is mixed use, then you have to give.
Well, why not 2 floors plus mixed use on the bottom? So I say that the houses around it are 3 floors.
Yep, absolutely. And
I'd like to see that.
we can do the 2 stories with an incentive. I think the last time we came together, someone in the audience said, well, if you're starting with 2 floors by right and you're just adding 1 floor of commercial, that's not really an incentive. So say, okay, then we'll try the 1 story. But there are multiple ways that we can play with that.
I think that gets at a number of concerns.
And while you're here, I just want to get these opinions. And I apologize, I'm going to be very informal about these conversations tonight because I think it's important. Would you be supportive of residential-only buildings within that area?
I would not be supportive of them all being residential only, but I don't see any reason why all of them have to be mixed use. And there's quite a bit of room there. So you could still have, some mixed use and have, some other buildings that are 3-floor residential.
Thank you.
Linda Crescenzi, 100 Walden Street. And I'd like to apologize firsthand because my question probably should have come a long time ago, but I'm just new to this issue. And my question is, what is the reason that the state has made this requirement? Is it because they want to incentivize using public transportation and they want these people that live a half a mile from our stations to use public transportation? What was the reason that they want these 2,000 new units in towns or particularly in Concord?
Sure. And I don't represent the state, but I'll just say my understanding is that, yes, that basically the legal logic they used was the state has made this investment in transit and they want more people to be able to use it. And that in a lot of communities throughout the Commonwealth, multifamily housing is not allowed by right. It has to go through a special use permit process or other processes that are unpredictable and time-consuming and ultimately more expensive. So they're looking to make that process easier in at least a portion of the area around transit.
Exactly. But it's quite a density, and I'm wondering if the town or if the state has provided any data that substantiates that people will use. We've had that public transportation since the 1800s, and I bet there's most of the people live a half a mile away from it, and I would doubt that even 1% of the people use the public transportation. So this is something I think we ought to substantiate before we, change this town quite significantly and add probably 4,000 people to the rolls and a lot of people in the schools and different things and who won't even use the public transportation.
I'll make one more comment for those of you who weren't at our first couple presentations, that the unit capacity is not about adding an additional 1,000 units to the community. It's simply what your zoning, your menu allows. So obviously anything that's already built, you've already got a lot of great density around these areas. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a lot of new development that's forced down your throat. It's really just a matter of what your menu provides developers.
I'm going to go to Zoom now for our next question. Benjamin Winslow, please. If you can unmute yourself and identify yourself. Thank you.
Hi, this is Casey Winslow, and I'm using my son's computer. So, I might be at a little disadvantage here, but because I'm on Zoom, I'm looking at the 2 maps, and it's really hard to recognize specifically which parcels you're referring to.
So
that's just
Casey,
a
I do
comment.
need you to
I don't know if
provide your
there's something in the
address.
handout there that explains it better, but it's tough to see from this end. And then I just have a couple of questions. So when you say 3-story, are you referring to 35 feet height? Is that the same?
So the town currently has 2 different standards for measuring height. The state is indifferent on how the municipality measures that. So it could be 30 feet, it could be 35 feet, it could be 40 feet. However, the town defines that. The state just cares that it's 3 stories.
Yeah, so the survey showed that a lot of people felt like it should be kind of in line with what we currently see and what our current existing zoning laws are. And I do believe that it's 35 feet. And so I just wanted to make a clarification that is what it is, and it will remain that way in the assumptions and in your analysis.
Yes.
Casey, can you provide your address, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, 160 Lindsay Pond Road.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from BA.
So I'm sorry, I just wanted to follow up on that, please.
Okay, if it's
So,
quick.
so first of all, the clarification is that, yes, we're referring to 35 feet, correct?
Well, actually, I'll turn that over to Elizabeth because, again, there are 2 different ways in which, I'll let you explain.
So there are 2 different ways in which height is calculated, and it is basically, the difference is whether it's a residential zone district or a commercial district. And in the residential zone district, it is 35 feet to the peak. And in a commercial zone district, it is 35 feet to the mean between the ridge and the plate or the eave. So depending on the slope of the roof, you could have a very low pitch, and the height would be at the middle. You could have a very tall pitch, and the middle between of the eave and the roof may make the building the overall height higher than 35 feet. So it depends on the 2 different ways on how height is measured. So whether it's to the peak or whether it's to the mean between the plate and the ridge.
But in any event, we
That's
wouldn't
very
propose.
helpful. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That's very helpful. So just like if we're looking at we talked about these various potential districts in these overlay districts. If it's considered a business district, then it's the latter way of calculating it that Elizabeth just explained. If it's currently a residential district, then it would be the former, measured from the peak.
Yes,
correct?
it could be. Yes.
Okay, excellent. I'm just trying to understand it.
Thank you. We're going to
one
move
other
on to our next
question.
questioner, please, and that would be Bonnie Albright.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Bonnie Albright. I live at 307 Main Street. I lived in Concord since 2001, and I have lived at 307 Main Street since 2012. 307 Main is in the Concord Center, 0.5 miles from the commuter rail station. I wanted to make a couple comments. The first is that I agree with the woman who was the 3rd person to make a comment tonight, in that Concord Center is a perfect place to take on the challenge of meeting these critical housing needs in such a beautiful, walkable, and a few places where you can walk to the grocery store and you can walk to the train. I personally would take it to work right down at MGH North Station. And I see many people walking by taking the train. So to someone else's point, I think there are a lot of people who use the train. You just might not see them, or at least I see them because I live on the cut-through street. So anyway, using my time here, my house is moderately sized, and I'm surrounded on kind of one side there are many apartments and kind of smaller houses, or kind of there are a lot of apartments on one side of me, and then on the other side is the historic district with sort of large looming 3-4-story homes with few inhabitants. And I'm not sure of the history. I'm sure a lot of other people in this room know about the history of of multiple families or multiple people, maybe boarders living in those large homes, and if there's something interesting there that can be incorporated, or if that's old news, you already went through that. But here's my question. Is there a possibility in this process for long-term resident homeowners in the Concord Center area to volunteer to convert their homes for this into this overlay? Or does the 5-acre non-contiguous minimum preclude that option?
So the 5-acre non-contiguous would preclude those homes from counting in the state's calculations. It would not preclude the town from including them. There are two things going on here, right? There are the needs of the town, and there are things that would make sense for the town to do regardless of whether it counts towards the state's requirements. So that's certainly an option. Another question I'll throw out to the group, and this is a good point, multifamily development comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and the state's definition for MBTA communities is simply that 3 units on a parcel count as multifamily. And you could say, well, within this district, we're comfortable with, 4 units on a parcel or 6 units on a parcel, but no more than that. So really trying to get at that, what people call the missing middle housing. So you don't necessarily have to allow 3-story apartment buildings, but you could allow those larger homes to be converted over time into 4 apartments and hit some density and by right multifamily in that way. So there are other ways to address Concord Center if you're comfortable with them.
May I add a tiny piece, or is my time up?
I think we have a lot of people, so
Okay.
perhaps if
Thank
you
you
come
so
back
much.
later if you have additional questions. Linda Neiman?
Hi, Linda Neiman, 59 Mallard Drive. I was just wondering, with regard to the issue of traffic, especially in West Concord and also in Concord Center, we keep talking about parking minimums. Have you considered parking maximums to incentivize folks to move into these high density homes without a car, so that they'll be incentivized to take the train and to walk various places?
That's completely up to the town. The state is, again, that's one of the things the state is silent on. It would probably prefer that you have less parking around or smaller parking requirements within these areas. But that is certainly something the town can consider.
Thank you. Julie McClure?
Hi, I'm Julie McClure. I reside at 2128 Main Street in Concord. And I wanted to echo the last comment on parking. It sounds like it's a concern that there not be enough, but my understanding is if we're planning for the future, it may be a good idea to reduce parking requirements to encourage multimodal transportation use and pedestrian activity, which only enhances our commercial activity in our downtowns. So thank you.
Thank you. E. Davies?
Hi, thanks. This is Eric Davies. I live at 232 Southfield Road, and I'm here with Melissa Wall as well, who lives at the same residence. I had 2 quick questions and then a comment. The 2 hopefully quick questions are, my understanding is, while we may well want to be in compliance with the state's mandate, we don't necessarily have to comply. It's only if we want to be eligible for funds from the state. Is that correct?
Inconclusive. The Attorney General has written a letter that says that municipalities are required to do this. No municipality has tested that theory yet, but the Attorney General has made it clear that she feels it's more than simply a carrot situation.
Okay, thanks. The second question is just so I understand, why is there a cap on how much of the housing that would be developed can be affordable? I don't understand why you would choose to cap it at 10%.
Sure. So And again, I'm not speaking for the state, but this is my understanding of the logic behind this, is that the more affordable housing you require, the more difficult it is for a developer to build and finance a project. It requires far more complex financing and often subsidies. And again, the state is looking for making it easier to build multifamily housing. So this has led to, again, it's not a tool for affordable housing, unfortunately, and that has led to some conflicts in a number of communities.
Okay, that helps. Thanks. And then finally, just a comment, and obviously maybe self-serving given that I live near the T station in Concord Center. It does seem like, well, I'll just speak for myself. I have a strong preference for the second and third plans that you presented. If for no other reason, only around concerns around density of development and traffic in Concord Center. Anybody who has tried to get in and out of the Crosby's parking lot during either of the rush hours in the morning or the afternoon knows that's a very dangerous place, and it would be very hard to understand how we could support more traffic there. So that's it. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you. We're going to switch back to the room. If you could identify yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is William Andrews. I live at 83 Grant Street. I have two comments and one question. The first comment is about the MBTA. Until it becomes more cost effective, people aren't going to ride it. It's much cheaper to drive into Boston, park at Alewife, and particularly if you have people with you. So that's the first comment. And the other, it doesn't make sense to have a half-mile radius. It'd be much better to have a bigger radius. I'm all in favor of the MBTA. As regards the last gentleman who spoke, referred to traffic around Concord Center, particularly in rush hour. It's terrible. Add more dwellings there, it's going to become worse. And I have a question about the area down by Paparazzi, where Paparazzi used to be. The juvenile detention center behind there is a large area, and I heard a rumor that it was going to be developed, and I wonder if you know if that's true or not.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure which part. We don't have a juvenile detention center.
Well, there is maybe I'm...
There's a family shelter.
Oh, no, that's next door in the hotel.
Yes.
That large space, I thought it was a juvenile detention center. It has wire around it. Maybe it's part of the prison. It's a big open field, open space. You see it if you...
Oh, so the Northeast Correctional Facility?
Correctional facility. Forgive me.
The farm?
The farm. Okay, the farm.
Yes. No, that is Department of Corrections property.
Okay.
That is basically a low security facility.
Right.
And all of that is, the portions that you see that are open are permanently protected under a Chapter 91 status through the legislature. So that is all protected, basically protected farmland.
Is the Rotary going to be developed? I heard rumor of that too, that
the state has been looking at redoing the Rotary. I first came to Concord in 2000. The first version, no lie, the first version of draft conceptual plans the state came out had an off-ramp going through our brand new municipal light plant. So I have not seen any conceptual plans I'm going to say in the last 5 years and haven't heard anything. The state is finishing up a Route 2 corridor study that goes from Arlington, Lincoln to Fitchburg. So I think with that corridor study, something will happen eventually, in my lifetime maybe.
We won't hold our breath.
So I can tell you there is nothing on the near horizon. And for a project of that
Okay.
size, near horizon is 10 years.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Next, please.
Yeah, I'm Steve Newmeyer, 61 Belknap Street. I was just curious about the process of the feedback. So you get a bunch of surveys and people answered questions, and then you had the map and people dropped pins in. And in the survey results, it shows 53% favored within a half mile of the MBTA. And then if you go to pins, it says highly favored MBTA. A lot of pins, I guess.
Most of the pins.
But then you have some people who drop maybe one pin, some people drop 100 pins, or so I was wondering how you weight the feedback, and just it didn't seem like you're identified. A couple people were surprised that they didn't have to identify who they were, their street address. So you could have your kids fill out, do some pins, or it just doesn't seem like there's a risk of people gaming the system. It just seemed odd. It seemed funny to me. So I was wondering about how you weight the feedback you've got given that problem.
Well, we first of all, there were some people who tried to cheat, and we could see that you were submitting multiple pins from the same IP address, and so we did take that into account. And we did try to just balance the responses to the direct survey questions versus the pins. I mean, we know there were some people who had, we would see this IP address did a whole bunch of pins, and so we took that into consideration. And when we were looking at some of the parcels outside the area, for example, we were scrutinizing those even more because we wanted to see, all right, well, was this the same person just putting a whole bunch of pins in the same area? Or no, there were a number of different IP addresses that were all seeming to agree about this parcel. So we tried to use that as a way to sort through where there seemed to be some momentum and consensus versus where it was a handful of people who were stacking the deck.
Yeah. It just kind of surprised me. The other major point, though, is in scenario 1, you show in West Concord there's 131 acres in the district area, and we need 50-acre minimum. Mm-hmm. And then it says 22 units per acre, and we need 15 per acre. So are we trying to just comply with the law, or are we trying to create more zoning for more housing? I mean, is the objective just to comply with the MBTA Act? And if that's the objective, why wouldn't you just have 50 acres instead of 131?
So I think you've heard from your neighbors today. There are some people who would like to comply with the barest minimum and get on with their lives, and there are some people who say, no, I think we should be taking advantage of this and adding housing to these areas. So we're really hearing both. And I don't think we've come to a definitive answer on that question yet, because we have had varying feedback from the public on that point. To your point, you're absolutely correct. Right now, you could take West Concord and shrink it significantly more and have, a handful of parcels that would probably meet the bare minimum of the requirements of the state. And that is still an option that we can explore.
Okay. And so with the feedback you get, is that like 100% of the decision-making process? Or does the select board have influence, the planning board have influence, the housing foundation?
So,
or is it weighted just to the feedback?
No, this is, I maybe missed at the beginning, this is the first draft. We're hoping to achieve it by the end of this meeting. And then we're going to be considering all of the overlay districts and portions over the rest of this year so that we have an article that will be submitted for town meeting to be heard in April of 2024. And again, the deadline is December 2024 in terms of complying with the state's requirements. So don't jump ahead of us in terms of all of those decisions will be influenced by this meeting, but subsequent meetings, and I'm sure deliberations at each planning board meeting, and I'm sure thoughts from the select board amongst other boards throughout the town.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Okay,
thank you.
thanks.
Sven Weber, 50 Belknap. I still try to find my words here. I'm a bit disappointed what is here in front of us. When I first heard about the MBTA part and the overlay idea, I was actually excited and thought it would be finally a first step for Concord to get out of the kind of a Jim Crow kind of zoning we have in our residential areas, where we at the moment in all residential areas allow literally 1 unit per lot, and that's it. And our lots are huge, even in town center, compared to other cities and towns nationwide. Our lots are huge. We are not touching this here. We are thinking in large apartment buildings that are nested in certain areas. We are building ghettos for it, but we are not allowing multifamily housing on smaller lots in normal residential setting. What other towns have. The house I'm living in is from 1815. It used to be first a shop, then it was a boarding house, then it was a 3-family house. Someone bought it, it's converted into a 1-family. I know there fit 3 to 4 families in there if you want to do it. I can't do it. It's 18,000 square feet lot, and doing it right now would be a major process. I was hoping we would allow in an overlay district the conversion or the building on smaller or reasonable sized lots of 2, 3, 4 family houses, and not big complexes where 50, 90, 150 apartments are. We are missing that opportunity. I'm disappointed. Sorry.
Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, that is, I think, probably one of the strongest ways to introduce more multifamily housing to Concord Center is if you're willing to allow 3, 4, 5, units within your existing homes or on your existing parcels.
I'm Paul Jameson, 419 College Road. I certainly agree with that comment and the previous person, the point he made about having multifamily housing in one house or in the general residential area. I have a question about, I don't understand, in scenario 1, I see a yellow area that just near the outside of the circle looks like an awful long walk. I wondered if you could tell me just where that is. I live not too far from there, but I don't recognize it from this small map.
So it's the Lowell Avenue and the Kai's apartment.
So the yellow areas that are shown in Concord Center would be, so that's going to be 100 Kai's Road, 100 Main Street, 100 Kai's Road, and then over where Concord Market is, Walgreens, Concord Market, and 97 Lowell Road.
Okay.
So it would
Thank
make
you.
up that little portion.
Yeah, I could see this then. Okay. It's still kind of a long walk to the train station, though. It'd be nice to get it closer to the station.
Sue Felsham, 19 Sunnyside Lane. I'm a member of the planning board. I also do not speak for the state, but I'd like to give a different perspective on Jeff's answer earlier, which is that I would say the primary goal of the state in promulgating this law is to create housing. And as to why within a half mile of train stations, because it increases the odds somewhat that people would be able to commute by transit, but I do not think they are actually expecting the majority of people to use transit to commute to their jobs or to not have cars at all. It will just be a slight benefit in terms of reducing traffic, and it will also be a great benefit to anyone who lives in this housing, as opposed to if towns were to choose only to allow housing in outlying areas where one always had to drive a long distance to access services. Thank you.
That's a very fair point.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vicki Alani. I'm at 257 Commonwealth Avenue in West Concord. And I am an architect, and when I started my career, the state was 35,000 units short of meeting its market equality level of housing in this state. Today, we're 200,000 units short. And so if you want to know why it feels like housing is more expensive, it's because we're sinking faster than we can hold the ship up. And housing, we are in a housing crisis in Massachusetts, not in other states too, but in particular in Massachusetts. So I'm a big advocate of density, and because one, it's good for the earth when we put all of our units closer together instead of building more sewer lines and water lines and roads from one more house and one more house and one more house. So I'd like to advocate that it might be good for us, for the earth, and maybe for our neighbors too, to be more open to getting more housing near us. I love Concord. I live in a dense part of Concord, and I love that it's dense. I would also, I'm going to say that I love the thinking of looking outside of the half-mile radius, but I don't think that helps us with the walkability goals of what the MBTA Communities Act does, or even what we're trying to build for housing moving forward. I think walkability is one of the reasons we all love our centers. Like, we can walk to all of the things that we're going to. And the less walkable it is, the more cars and traffic we will have to deal with forever. I also want to just advocate for changing the parking formula in West Concord in particular, because I don't know if anyone's walked behind any of the stores. We have an enormous amount of asphalt between Commonwealth Avenue and the rail trail. And I walk there daily, and I have never seen it more than 35% full. So we are paving our way into more and more parking in West Concord. So if we're saying we want to build more housing, but each of those units now will have to have 2 more spaces, we'll never, ever undo what we've done, which is every building has to have its own spaces. And so I would like to advocate that we rethink how we use the parking that's currently in West Concord, because it's unused. And it's kind of sad that we're going to have to repave that every 5 years. And so I just want to add that to the thinking of how we come up with our numbers too. And thank you for tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm going to take one question from Zoom, and then I'm going to ask people to think of scenarios they would like Jeff to calculate. And then we're going to try and switch the conversation so that you make him go through his paces and see if what you're envisioning will be compliant. So, but I'm going to take Gavin from Zoom, and then we'll switch to questioning.
Hi there, everyone. Gavin Colbert, 88 Old Marlborough Road. I am a member of the Climate Action Committee as well, but I'm speaking as a citizen. Just wanted to have a few comments. So, multifamily housing and density overall is much better for the environment. There's lower emissions per resident. So I think it's imperative that we upzone in order to bring Concord better in line with our town climate goals. Second, I also agree that the assumptions on parking should be dialed down. I believe you said it was 20 parking spots, and I think that's high. And particularly if we look at the T's goals to electrify the commuter rail, run it more frequently with 15 to 20 minute headways over the next decade, you could definitely envision a future where people are living in these units within a half a mile of the train station. They're able to bike around in West Concord, Concord Center, able to walk to the T and take the T into Boston, whether for work or for recreation. So I think it's really important to consider that scenario and really dial down the parking assumptions, because people might not have cars and might elect not to have cars. And then finally, I just wanted to note, I'm very supportive of the mixed use idea, especially having that first floor of commercial. I envision an area around the Concord Center, the Concord T-stop, where, let's say, where currently today there's a place like Bedford Farms and Sorrento's, local shops that we all love. If they were able to be incorporated into sort of the upzoning plan where they could still make deals with developers to have that first floor commercial and have the density, the 2 floors of density above them, that would be fantastic. It would be a way to revitalize our town centers. Some people say, oh, we don't have enough good restaurants in Concord. Well, it's nice to see more people to support the restaurants. So I think it would be a great idea overall for the town, stimulate economic activity. And I think we need to really think strongly about what we're doing here and make sure that we're supportive of the not only new residents in town, but also existing businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'm actually going to ask Elizabeth to give Jeff an opportunity to show how you can run the model.
All right. And I will say, just to temper everyone's expectations, let me see if I can find. In terms of what I can do live tonight, I can play with the geographies that we have already input into 3 scenarios. If there are ideas for other geographies that you would like us to explore, we can talk about that, and we need to build those models. But I can play with any of the geographies that we have in the 3 scenarios.
So I think we're going to start with scenario 1.
There's people with other comments.
So I think what the chair said is to go through one example so people can see what it is as far as how to change things. And, if time, we're still only at 7:47. This goes till 8:30. I'm sure there will be additional time for comments.
Can people standing in line who would like to see additional scenarios ask you for those while we're standing here?
So let's see how it happens as we run through one, and I think that's great.
I just need to figure out how to.
Is it not going to work?
Trying to find out where to.
Huh?
There we go. And I can make this quick, just so you get a sense of how the compliance model works, what sort of inputs we can adjust as we move forward. So it starts out with each of the districts. We enter in, parcel data. So all the parcels that would be included, we have what size they are, where they're located, and so forth. And then on this screen, we can add the different assumptions. And why is this not letting me scroll? Anyone is smarter at this technology than I am.
Here comes Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay. So, for example, we have here for West Concord, we can put in the building type and density. So if we wanted to say, we're only interested in allowing up to 4 families here, if we wanted to test that as opposed to the larger apartment complexes, we could say, okay, we can allow up to 4 families on each of these lots, and no more than that. We're also allowed to enter the minimum lot size, and whether the lot size is based on the size of the development. We can put in, again, the building height, and any step backs, the higher a building gets, although if we're limited to 3 stories, that's probably not an issue here. We're allowed to enter the percent of the building coverage that a building takes on a lot, the amount of open space, the yard setbacks, whether you have any other special restrictions on where a building is built. So all of that gets inputted here. This is where we have the 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit, and certainly we can reduce that to 1.5 to 1. We can base it on instead the number of bedrooms. So if you've got a 1-bedroom unit, that only requires 1 parking space. If you have 3 bedrooms or more, maybe that requires 2. So we do have the ability to play with these dimensional requirements in a number of ways. And then finally, of course, the number of maximum dwelling units per acre, which again, we've largely been setting at the state minimum.
So based on some of the comments, one scenario was reducing the size of the parcels in West Concord area and then adding a few of the parcels on Thoreau Street in the Concord Center District.
Yep.
So I don't know if...
So I can't change the geography real time.
Okay.
That takes going through the, so I can play with things with the existing geographies, but we'd have to build another model for every geography that we're testing.
Okay. Yeah. So...
But yeah, we can certainly describe the other scenarios that people would be interested in exploring.
So one of those...
But we can't do that tonight.
No, but we can, so while we can't do that tonight, what we can, one option that was brought up.
Well, perhaps then we should go to the other questions.
Sure, and then I'll finish this and we can show this.
Okay. Sorry for the delay.
No, that's fine. You're very brave to do live simulation for us. Laura Davis, 330 Garfield Road. I am a member of the Transportation Advisory Committee, but speaking on my own behalf, I do want to echo the last several comments, specifically the missed opportunity for the missing middle housing, as you said. I think that this is an opportunity for Concord to think about how do we want to allow our community to evolve over time? Single-family zoning is exclusionary. It creates economically homogeneous communities. And if we allow for some of those neighborhoods within walking distance of the train station to slowly change over time, it's a gentle approach to bringing more housing into the community. So I would love to see some scenarios that show some single-family neighborhoods being allowed to have 3, even just 3-unit density. We have some duplexes allowed in some areas now, but just allowing for that next step up could take some of the pressure off of West Concord, make it more equitable, and allow the community to evolve in a much more integrated way instead of having apartment dwellers over here, single families over here, and never the two shall meet on the street while walking their dogs. So I'd love to see that. And I also would love to see scenarios that are parking based on the number of bedrooms. I have been speaking to a lot of people about parking, given my involvement in transportation in town. And for a lot of studio apartments, 1 bedrooms, even some 2 bedrooms, 2 parking spaces are just not necessary. If you're in a studio, you're very unlikely to have 2 cars, and there may be another unit in the same building where they only have 1 car and they have 3 bedrooms, and so it gives a little bit of flexibility. So I'd love to see lower parking requirements. We did do a big parking analysis in 2019 that showed that we have some of the highest parking minimums in the entire area. We have more than most of our neighbors, so it would be great to see less asphalt, more people being encouraged to walk, bike, take the train. And I will just say that transportation is a little bit of a chicken or the egg situation. If you don't have density, you can't run good public transportation. And so if we don't allow the communities to evolve, we can't have the public transportation that people would actually use. Because once an hour is not enough, but we can't run a train to single-family homes. It doesn't really make sense. So.
Thank you. Next, please, in the room.
Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap Street. I wanted to make a comment in regards to the incentive, the purple areas, and particularly in the village centers. My understanding is that to have combined business, business on the first floor and housing on the second floor, that with the MBTA Act, you can only incentivize that, you can't require that. And incentives are, they either take them or they don't, right? And you can't guarantee that they're going to take them. So my understanding in talking to developers is mixed use is much more complicated and difficult to build and also to get funding for. So if a developer has the choice to build something difficult, combined business or residential, what are they going to do, right? So they're going to build residential, and now we'll have residential in our village centers, which is not really supporting our local businesses. And what's going to happen, I've heard from the planning board concerns about hollowing out our business in village centers, and we don't want to do that. Or I don't want to do that. I want to support our local businesses and want to keep the combined. I don't want residential only in our downtown areas. The second piece I wanted to talk about was the suggestions of the areas that you might be interested in scenario building. And on number 3, you gave, Elm Street and 229 Main and Barrett's Mill Road. And if you look at, taking that plus the West Concord and the Concord, it was, significant area of development. I was thinking maybe we could scale back some of that and pick one of those outside of the area, because I don't think you want to, you're saying, well, this is just zoning, we're not going to build, nobody's going to build, but the minute you give them the zoning, they'll build. Just like the minute we went under whatever, we got a 40B 2 days later. And as soon as paparazzi went out of business, we have a development there. So they're waiting to develop. And so I don't think we should put it all in our village centers. I think we should spread 50% of it out to other areas and other big areas like 229, whatever it is, Main Street, or the Elm Street area, or some combination of that. And then, have some in that Baker Ave area or whatever you have identified in West Concord that's not the incentive area, the yellow area. But I think you can kind of scale back what you have in West Concord Center from 100 acres to 50 acres, and then maybe put something in the 2229 Main Street and see if that scenario spreads it out a little bit and accomplishes the same objective. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to Zoom for one question from Pamela Dritt.
Hi, Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green. Thank you for all your hard work. I'm a little disturbed by 2 things. One, the idea that we could incentivize by removing some of the carbon requirements, and I am vehemently against doing that. We need to incentivize more for carbon. Throw that out. I don't know who came up with that, but no. And also, I would urge people to look at the current 3-story buildings in the town and see if putting another story on top of that would do anything to make the area less beautiful, less gorgeous, less inviting, feel any worse. I think the arbitrary, well, let's keep things low is a problem, because remember, for every additional story we put on our buildings, we can have a park on the ground floor because it won't need to be spread out. Can you give us a scenario in which we're allowing as incentives an extra floor for every layer of commercial retail on the first floor, and for every story of parking included in the building footprint?
Thank you.
Because that rid of pavement too.
Okay, thank you. The next question in the room?
Parashar Patel, 397 Sudbury Road, member of FinCom, but speaking for myself. I personally like the concept of mixed use and retail on the first floor. But I think we ought to think carefully about incentivizing too much and incentivizing in the right places. Because as we've seen recently, when economic times change and you have vacant storefronts, that doesn't contribute to the livability and the appeal of the area. So the last thing I think we would want is too many incentives, create sort of short-term, unsustainable retail use, commercial use on the first floor, and then you end up with vacant storefronts because they don't have the capacity economically to be sustained. So we ought to think carefully about that. I'm not sure how we do that from a planning perspective, but that is something I think we should watch out for as we think about these zoning overlay districts. Thanks.
Thank you. One more in the room, and then we'll go back to Zoom.
Sven Weber, 50 Belknap. Just because you asked for concrete scenarios, I would propose you're looking at two additional scenarios. One is more follow-up on my first comment is take just all the residential area within the circles and do kind of 5 units per acre. And that gives you some flexibility on the more dense areas and see where it comes out. The other one is a more extreme approach. Why aren't you looking at having all residential districts of Concord 5 units per acre allowance by right? That gives Concord a massive way to grow in a sustainable way. We have a lot of big lots, and 5 units per acre is not outrageous.
Bonnie Albright on Zoom, please.
Hi there. Thanks for listening to me again. My comment was just that during the time that we've had this meeting, my son, who lives with me, who doesn't own a car, just came back from work, walked back from work, checked in, walked to Crosby's, went grocery shopping, and walked home. So I think this is a great example of what is possible with this kind of walkable neighborhood, and doesn't even need to own a car, is in his 20s. So I'd just like to add that point. And then finally, some of the zoning in the town is really conflicting. It would be nice to kind of have a mission statement that's actually true, that's actually comprehensively dedicated to the housing production plan goals of meeting these housing needs. For example, I have an Airbnb in my house, which is licensed or registered with the town and on my deed, and I'm not allowed to also have an apartment because I have an Airbnb. And it just doesn't seem to make sense to me. If there's enough room, the kids are older, I only have one living with me, I don't want to move, I want to age in place. I also have an accessible area for myself for aging here. So why can't I use the space? And I agree with the previous person saying that maybe we should open this up. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to the room. Next, please.
Hello, Carmen Reese, 52 Devon Street. I'm the moderator, but I'm obviously speaking for myself here and not as the moderator. I just have 2 questions. The first is about climate resiliency and whether we're thinking about that as we look at these parcels. And specifically, I noticed that there's a river going through the middle of the large parcel in West Concord. And I wonder how much of that parcel is in the floodplain and what that looks like going forward. And my second question is just about, are we considering synergies? And actually, this is a wonderful follow-on to the last speaker's comment. We know that we have lots of older people, that we have an aging population here in town who cannot find space in town to downsize. And it's an interesting question whether if they could take their existing single-family homes and turn them into triple plexes, if that's a word, whether that would solve their problems so that you would be able to address a couple of different policy goals at the same time. Thanks.
Thank you. Next in the room. Hi, Debbie Whitestone, Barrett's Mill Road, 883. Aside from being in a little bit of shock that there's a Barrett's Mill Road parcel on this, which I never heard about before tonight. I won't focus on that because it's small. What I am concerned about is that the objectives, the outcomes that we're after with this plan are murky to me. It's not clear to me what the state is trying to accomplish with these specifications. And I know the town has its own ideas about housing. I mean, we need more housing. There's no doubt about it. We need more housing. What kind of housing? That's questionable. We need to be friendly to the earth. We need to have affordable living situations. And walkability. Okay, we need all of those. But it's not clear which of these elements of the plan will produce which outcome, or which set of plans will most likely lead to which outcome. I would love to see more discussion of that in the plan so that more of us could understand what the purpose is, and we could think about, is this input likely to create that outcome? Okay. Thank you. Next in the room.
Thank you. Jeff Alls at 78 Nimrod Drive. Sorry if I have a few questions, and I just moved here, so I'm not sure if they've already been answered in previous meetings. But first, the parking of 2 per unit, where does that come from? Is that a Concord town requirement? And how do you define a unit? Is a studio the same as a 6,000 square foot house? Does that make zero sense to me?
Yeah.
We should really change that based on, I think the comment was bedrooms or square footage or something like that. If we're trying to incentivize active transit, walkability, that makes zero sense. Okay.
So I'll answer them as you go along.
Sure.
Currently, and since 1928, when zoning was first adopted in the town of Concord, the parking requirements for different uses is based on that, originally started based on that use. So every residential unit required 2 spaces. Does not differentiate between whether it's a studio or a 6-bedroom home. I can say currently the planning board does have a consultant who is looking at specifically the zoning bylaw and specifically the minimum parking requirements and the other different parking aspects in the zoning bylaw as they relate to current industry standards and just what is I'm going to say makes better sense than 2 spaces per dwelling unit. Sure. And that's something that is happening right now as well. So there may be for town meeting besides MBTA communities, the board will be looking at other potential zoning bylaw amendments, and that may be one of them.
Can those be changed in these overlay zones then, or it has to stick to the 2? Okay.
No. So for the MBTA communities, all of those dimensional requirements, whether it's height, setbacks, parking, all of those can be changed. So I think what Jeff was saying, we now have 20 minutes left, but maybe just because we can't change the geometry, as he said, the number of parcels that have been identified. But what would happen if we did run through a scenario and said, okay, 1 space for studios and 1 bedrooms, 1.5 spaces for 2 bedrooms, and 2 spaces for 3 or more bedrooms. And he can run through that. And so that can kind of give you an idea of how, how those changes in dimensional requirement, one simple change in a dimensional requirement could affect the outcome.
Yeah, I believe it was someone online had said earlier, if we increase the height to 4 stories, and when you do things like that, if you're willing to increase the height, if you're willing to decrease your parking requirement, that's less space that's being taken up, and you can use that space for other things. That is certainly something I would love to see personally.
Okay. Can I ask more? Or,
yes.
The 5-acre contiguous, where does that come from? Why do you need 5 acres?
That's state law. That's just how the law was written.
And what is that actually defining? Is that it has to be areas that touch each other?
It has to be all areas that touch each other, and if there's a non-contiguous piece, it has to be at least 5 acres. So they didn't want a community to say, well, we already have, a 1-acre apartment complex here, another one here, another one here, and just use all that to get to their minimum. Now, again, that doesn't mean you can't include those areas in your district. It just means the state's not going to count it.
I think one of the things the state said was they wanted neighborhoods.
Right, exactly.
They wanted, if you were going to change things for a neighborhood, to be considered, as opposed to, like you say,
spot zoning, basically.
Just, putting one large structure at the end of the corner.
It's not clear to me why the area around Thoreau Street doesn't fall within that, because can't you just cover an area of 5 acres and say that's a contiguous area?
Yes. If, again, as long as you're willing to allow multifamily housing by right within the area, and it sounds like there are at least a number of people here today who would like us to test that in what are currently largely single-family neighborhoods.
Okay. I still have more, but I'll let other people go.
Well, you haven't technically used your full 2 minutes.
Okay.
We're answering in between.
I'll make one comment. I feel like scenario 3 makes the least sense to me if we're trying to promote walkability. I think that seems to be a solution if we're just trying to put it somewhere else. But that's just my opinion. That's not a question. The final question I have is, why does the mixed use seem to complicate everything that you're discussing here? It seems like if it's just residential, it's easier to calculate, or is it easier for the state to calculate?
It's not so much the ease of calculation, but the ease of development. So the state law says that you cannot require ground floor commercial or mixed use within your district. You have to allow some amount of a residential only building by right.
A residential only by right?
Yes. So that's one of the other considerations. We have to either consider, all right, where are the areas in town where we are comfortable with a residential only building going, knowing that, other people have said there's only a limited market for commercial, and the market is very strong for residential. So, if there are areas where this is our village center and part of the livability of our community requires that ground floor active use, then that's one of the considerations that the community has to factor in, is where you want to draw those lines, and if you want to rely on incentives for that to happen, or if you just want to remove those areas from consideration.
But didn't you earlier say that we're allowed to use 25% of this space as the mixed use component if we tag it as that?
No.
So is that something? Did I misunderstand that?
Yeah. So that was the guidance was recently changed. You still cannot require mixed use in your MBTA communities district. You can take a separate district that allows mixed use and kind of put it through the same compliance model and calculate the potential unit capacity there, and use that unit capacity to reduce the number of units you have to hit in your MBTA communities district. I know that is very hard to follow.
It sounds like the same thing that I just said in a different way.
No, well, it's not.
You're now allowed to have less units or a smaller area.
You're now allowed to have fewer units in your MBTA communities district.
Yes.
If you transfer that from
So I can give you the best example. We have the West Concord Village and West Concord Business District. So that's Main Street where the shopping plaza is and Com Ave. So mixed use is permitted there. And so, but under the state guidelines says, we'll allow, basically give you, 25% credit for those mixed-use districts, but you have to amend your zoning you cannot require any parking minimums for any of the business commercial uses. That is a much bigger conversation than the planning board has had, and it is not something that can be undertaken now to the time the warrant closes the beginning of January. So basically the state put a restriction on communities with their existing mixed-use zoning by saying, fine, we'll give you 25% credit, but you have to get rid of your parking minimum for that commercial, uses. That's a different conversation that has to happen. So.
Okay. We're going to go to a couple of the questions on Zoom since they're lining up. Lois Wassoff.
Hi, Lois Wassoff, 258 Sudbury Road. I'm a member of the Finance Committee, but I'm speaking for myself. I just would like to ask a question, I guess. I remember from one of the earlier meetings I attended, there was a discussion about how the overlay district doesn't supersede other zoning considerations, environmental issues, things like that. I'm thinking particularly of the Crosby's lot, which has wetlands. It's completely surrounded by wetlands. And then there's the railroad tracks, and then there's Sudbury Road. So there's no way to create additional entries and exit ways into that lot. How does that factor into your considerations? That's one question, and then I have a second question.
So one of the state guidelines does, while the MBTA communities zoning has to be by right multifamily, it does allow communities to utilize the site plan review process, which the town of Concord has a very robust site plan review process. There's specific criteria already established in the zoning bylaw. They range from criteria A all the way through H, dealing with parking, lighting, neighborhood compatibility, traffic, waste, sustainability. So even a multifamily project, if that were to be proposed in that location, would still need to go through site plan review. They would still have to address their impacts, whether that is traffic, wastewater, sustainability, lighting, all those other requirements, and the planning board could condition any decision to address those impacts. So that deals with the development side of things, and the zoning bylaw, the existing zoning, which we call the base zoning, currently Crosby's Market is zoned Thoreau Depot Business District. That base zoning stays in place. As Jeff had mentioned earlier, zoning is basically a menu and rules that go with that. So if you were to think about, you have your base zoning, and we seem to use food metaphors a lot lately. You have your base zoning, you have your certain pizza, and the zoning bylaw says, okay, you can put this, this on it and this on it, and but you're not allowed this and you're not allowed that, and the zoning bylaw establishes what those restrictions are, and what's allowed and what's prohibited. So that site plan review process would still be in place and will be part of the MBTA community zoning.
And I had one other question, and this is just a point of clarification. I'm not quite understanding it. Looking at the maps, I can't really tell whether or not some of the areas that you're thinking about including include existing areas that might have, I mean, it clearly includes areas that have things like shops on them, but do these districts pick up single-family homes or two-family homes that already exist there? And what's the impact on the existing structures? What happens to our properties when they're affected by, if they're included in this overlay district?
There's no effect on somebody's property. Property owner still has the rights under zoning to do what they wish to their property. It's basically a choice. So currently, let's say in the Residence C zone district, or any residential zone district, a property owner has the choice to build a single-family home by right. They can build an additional dwelling unit of 750 square feet or less by right. That's that's a choice. Doesn't mean every property owner is going to make that choice. The MBTA community zoning will just be another choice for a property owner. And in residential districts, currently, on the map, I don't believe there are any existing residential zone districts within the half mile that were highlighted on those maps. And so, the options to those property owners, there would be no additional option as far as the MBTA.
To the property owners
communities.
or to developers expressing interest in purchasing their properties?
If each individual property owner has the right to, if they wish to sell a property or to a developer or not, it would be based on what that property owner wishes to do with their property. But currently, none of the scenarios within either district within the half-mile radius highlight existing residentially zoned properties.
Right. And I would just highlight that's been actually one of the critiques of the scenarios from a number of people here today. I would like to see some of those neighborhoods included.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we'll take one in the room, and then we're going to go to Zoom for a couple more,
Sure.
because they're lining up.
Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap Street. It's a little hard to see, your scenarios. Are you going to put them in the GIS map up on the community website? Because it's a lot easier to zoom in and actually see the streets and what properties you're actually talking about. Because it was kind of unclear to me, like, what's included and what's not in the three scenarios. So I see Elizabeth nodding her head, so that means yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
The presentation, along with this whole meeting, is being taped. Like our other community forums, all of it will be posted to the website.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying we see pictures in the handouts and they're screenshots. I want to see the actual map. Like, how you had the map out there and you could drop a pin and you could zoom in and you could see what the street was. Are you going to put those maps for the three scenarios is the question, not the screenshot, the map that we can navigate around?
That's not entered into the map you can navigate around, but we have very high quality maps that you can zoom in and see the details.
Okay, that would be great. And then as a follow-up on that, I was wondering, are any existing multifamily homes part of your scenario 1, 2, or 3?
Yes. So if you look at one of the earlier maps, shows hash marks where there are existing multifamily or proposed multifamily housing.
Okay. Yeah, it would be great to understand. I don't know if we zoom in, we could see it, or maybe just put a list of the multifamily homes that are within scenario 1, 2, and 3. That would be helpful. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and you mean the names of the properties?
Yeah. Because people say, oh, the Prescott or the Muse, we know what that is, but we don't necessarily, like, if you look at the map, kind of know where it is. So that would be helpful. And then on the 40B that's over on Baker Ave, that's proposed to being built, and that's I think 5 or 6 stories or something. right? Is that part of your calculation and scenario, whatever, whatever?
Not right now. So our scenario currently assumes that 3 stories by right. If the community wanted to say, well, this is happening anyway, let's make a sub-district here and allow 6 stories by right, you could certainly do that.
Okay.
Right, so if we take that building, that's, I think it's gonna be 5 or 6 stories, right? That's what, 5, right? So if we take that building that's already in the zoning area on 40B, right, on Baker Ave, and we say that is 5 stories, then we can count it as 5 stories and more density? How does that affect the scenario versus saying it's only 3 stories?
So we would have to come up with a sub-district that was just that property.
Right.
I mean, it is contiguous to other properties, so
Right.
then you're avoiding the 5-acre issue. And and then we say within the sub-district, you can go up to 5 stories by right. That is certainly an option.
Okay.
That would be
so-
nice to see as a scenario, because then you get more density, you get more units, then we can shrink the area, to comply,
So,
right?
I'm going to call time. We have a
Okay.
few people who have not asked this question yet, and so I'm going to go to them. So, I believe you've been up at the microphone before, so could you come to the microphone, and then I'll take the people who haven't asked a question also on Zoom, and we'll probably be close to out of time.
Henry Dane speaking only for myself. If we are creating more residential density, that requires more retail facilities to serve those residents, and people who move into a denser residential area, and you talk about walkability, have to have someplace to walk to, and they won't want to live in an area that is just residential. And if the MBTA zoning prohibits us from requiring retail space, first floor space in developments in an included zone, that really forces us not to include existing retail zones in these new zoning areas. That doesn't prevent us from passing other zoning, which has nothing to do with this program, that would permit mixed use in existing retail districts, which would require the maintaining of retail space on the ground floor. We've done something like that in West Concord, where we have prohibited certain business uses and have adopted zoning that favored only retail space. And people who live in a more dense residential area will want and need restaurants and other shops, convenience stores, shoemakers, natural gourmets, whatever you have it, in that neighborhood that they have, so they have someplace to go to while they're living there. As far as these other questions about calculating height and parking requirements, if we're in the business here of changing zoning, we can change any zoning. Although I think that it may get complicated if we're changing zoning that is not specifically directed to affordable housing. It may then require a 2/3 vote of the town meeting for some of the provisions, rather than just a straight majority vote for the housing issues.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to go to people who have not asked questions or commented yet. I believe it's Katie.
Hi, yes, this is Heidi Cater. I live at 100 Elmbrook Lane here in Concord. And I just wanted to suggest to the people who are listening to read some of the documents associated with this MBTA community. zoning I received and read. It's called Advisory Concerning Enforcement of the MBTA Communities, which was very helpful in understanding that it seems to me that this really isn't law, that this is an act that we have to ratify as a town before it becomes law. And it does seem to me like, you know, if we don't comply, then we're just rendered ineligible to receive discretionary funds. And so it seems optional to me. And then another document I would suggest everyone to read through is called the Zoning Act, Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The Zoning Act, which was enacted in 1975 and was updated on January 14th, 2021. And it seems as if the law aspect of this that's referred to tonight is that the language was signed into law. But this is merely an act, it's not a law, and that we'll be voting on it in April, so April or May. So, you know, I'd like to look into the legality of this entire MBTA community zoning act. And then the third document is called Compliance Guidelines for Multifamily Zoning Districts under Section 3A of the Zoning Act. I hear the word law mentioned in tonight's presentation, so I want to question that. And to me, it seems like this whole MBTA, you know, zoning push that the state is doing right now is trickle down from, you know, clear globalist agendas, including the United Nations housing goals, the World Economic Forum Agenda 2030.
Oh, well, thank you.
Like
I'm afraid your 2 minutes are up, but thank you for your comment. And I'm going to go to, I think it will be our last question, Joseph Stein.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'll keep this brief. I don't want to hold everyone up. I thought this was a great conversation tonight. I had a question and a comment. My question was, would this zoning focus on redeveloping existing areas, or would it allow for new housing on undeveloped land?
Both.
So this is just zoning, and it is no different than the existing zoning, whether somebody has undeveloped land or whether there's existing land that somebody wants to redevelop. A good example is currently the zoning bylaw for the limited business district 1, which is where Paparazzi's is. There's the zoning bylaw outlines what the permitted uses are, and they're currently going through site plan review to propose a redevelopment of that site. There's other properties in town which are completely undeveloped, and the zoning bylaw sets out the rules and the requirements to develop that property. And if somebody came in, they would have to go through and follow those rules. And to a previous question, the MBTA communities zoning as an overlay district is it's an overlay district in the zoning, and just like any of the existing requirements in the zoning bylaw, it does not supersede or override any other provisions, regulations that the town has. That's the Wetlands Protection Act, you know, all the other different rules and requirements and regulations that the town has adopted. Those are all still in effect. So I just wanted to remember I didn't answer that previously, so I did want to make that clear.
Okay, well, I would just like to say to everyone who's attended tonight here and on Zoom, thank you very much. This has been an exceedingly constructive and collegial meeting, and I can't imagine how grateful I am to have all your comments, but mostly to have the respect of some wonderful citizens and residents of Concord who are so thoughtful, and I hope that we can please you as we move forward with this process. I also want to thank Jeff Davis and Elizabeth Hughes, our town planner. As you know, our next steps are to continue to get input from the public, but we will probably move all of that to our planning meetings. So our next meeting is September 26th. I don't know that we have the first draft, but I think we have a lot of ideas and some more scenarios that need to be explored. I wish you all a very good evening and a very good launching of all your other activities in Concord. And our next meeting will be also hybrid, so we will be welcoming you on Zoom and also in person.
Well, speaking now, not for myself, but speaking as chair of the select board, I want to thank you very much for your efforts on this matter.
Thank you all. Good night.